have a choice. You're making choice no matter what. No, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. Oh, I just made that choice, didn't I? I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. My wife wants me to do this. I'm going to go do that. She made me do it. That's wrong. I chose to do what she wanted me to do. You can't get out of it. Right? By the way, Sartre used this argument on the Nazis. He was French. During the Second World War, he was captive for a while. He was also one of the ones trying to fight against the Nazis. It's kind of interesting. He wrote a couple of plays while he was in jail under the Nazis, and the Nazis let it get published and performed, even though it was clearly anti-Nazi. They liked it. It was good stuff. But then after the end of the war, all the Nazis are on trial in Nuremberg, right? The Nuremberg trials. And they're all defending themselves. Oh, I killed those 250 civilians because I was ordered to. If I didn't kill them, they would have killed me. So you freely chose to kill those 250 people. No, they made me do it. You chose to do what they made you do. So they hung him for doing it, right? That was not an excuse. Sartre's argument wins. You're always free. You're condemned to be free as a human being. So all this time that you're blaming the state for ordering you to do the things you did, and say, not at fault. Nope, that's not an excuse. A quick mention, Simone de Beauvoir. Two of them. She was prettier. Am I allowed to say stuff like that? When she was younger. And they had a long relationship. And in fact, he had like 50 other lovers. And she didn't mind. It was one of those weird things. They were not married, but they were partners. Used to sit in the cafe Du Moulin, the Two Flies. I don't know. It's famous. You could go visit it and sit where the Sartre and Simone in Paris. You could go sit there. It's one of those famous places people like to visit. Probably says that in here somewhere. So he's interesting. She's interesting. She wrote The Second Sex, feminist book about the second sex, etc. So you could look them up. They're examples of existentialists. But once you become a Hegelian, theoretically, this applies to you guys as well. If you've been following, I don't know that there's any contemporary argument, at least that understands the situation, that would disagree that we're post-Hegelian. Remember the quote, all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato, but all of contemporary philosophy is a reaction to Hegel. So if you're into the sociological, and it's really not, I keep emphasizing it's not just Hegel, it was all the friends. Goethe is part of this. Humboldt, Schelling, they're all thinking in this evolutionary, natural way. The organic evolution is their thinking, right? The oak tree is the symbol, instead of the clock from the Enlightenment period, from the Descartes and so on. There's a clock. Everything's a clock. Now we're organic with all the complex interrelationships between the roots and the bacteria and the organisms and the trees, growing and dying, and It's really hard to say, is that a tree? Yes, it's a tree. Is this a tree? No. Not yet. Right? Where do you draw the line? That's very difficult once you get into this stage of our development. But once you get into this, Kierkegaard says, okay, so what then becomes the meaning of life? What should I do? And he says that we go through stages once you reach this point, and he feels like the first stage is the aesthetic stage, not the aesthetic. Remember, the aesthetic is the folks that decide to give up everything, but the aesthetic stage is the stage of living for pleasure. We want to enjoy everything. My favorite example of this, the stage that they talk about here is his trouble with romance. And the story of the seducer is the one where he decides he's going to make this woman fall in love with him. And he's scientific about it. So he knows that, the most chance you have of getting her interested in you is not coming on too strong, so you're just kind of the friend's friend, you're standing there in the background while she's talking with her friend. You gradually get to know her better. She becomes more interested in you. Eventually you get to the point where you ask her to elope with you in the story. You make arrangements. At 3 a.m. in the morning, she sneaks out of the house with her suitcase. The coach is waiting for her. She gets into the coach and drives to the park where she's waiting for you to meet with her so that you can go off and elope. And you never show up. Because the whole point of the exercise was to see if you could get her to do that. I read that story, and I was at the age where, that was something I wanted to do, is get, a woman interested in me. And when he just left her stranded in the coach in the park, I was furious with him. What an asshole. But it was fun, I bet, living for pleasure. During this time period, he comes home, and he was the hit of the parties, and he looks at his pistol that he has in the top drawer of his bureau and thinks about killing himself. Because just living for pleasure is meaningless. You come to realize that it's no life at all, really. Plus, as you get older, things aren't as fun anymore. And so you end up having a problem. So the aesthetic stage, just living for fun, is a dismal failure as a response or an answer to the question of the meaning of life. Well, if you've been lucky though, and you end up marrying and having children, now at that point you end up feeling duty to the children, to your wife, to the community. You want the community to succeed. So now you follow the ethics of the community. But here's the trouble, is that remember, you don't believe in any of these stories that explain why we have the ethics. You don't believe that those ethics are really the right. That's just what we think we should do as part of this community. That's good reason, to do things. You want the community to succeed. But what if you really think tariffs are a good idea? You're on the other side, So the individual shifts from self-indulgence to self-discipline, trying to live a morally good life. Well, his example of this, they use Judge Wilhelm in either or, but my favorite example of this stage is Agamemnon. Agamemnon, remember, the king of the Greeks, who's trying to get all of the different Greeks to go to Troy and fight for Helen in order to get his brother Menelaus' wife Helen back and to kick ass. Because after all, they stole her. Paris stole her. They deserve what they get, right? Well, Agamemnon, when he leads the Greeks, and they're all stuck on the island where they all come together in order to form the fleet and head off to Troy. At that point, did I talk about this at all earlier? The winds aren't blowing correctly, and so the gods say that he has to sacrifice his daughter in order for the fleet to get the winds and to continue on. And of course, as the story goes, he did sacrifice his daughter. He offered his daughter Iphigenia up to the gods to literally be sacrificed on the altar there on the island. You see, I think I showed you even part of the movie, right? There's a movie, Greek movie, that's pretty neat. But in any case, he didn't believe that ethic. He didn't believe that any of that was true, that the gods really wanted his daughter sacrificed. But he had to do it because of his duty, because the people expected it of him. So he did what he didn't believe in, and it was a desperate thing for him to kill his daughter. He loved his daughter. And if you're familiar with the Sophocles tragedies, afterwards his wife, Clytemnestra, will end up killing him once he gets back home. And that causes all kinds of other, interactions between the daughter, the other children and so on. So main reason for a lot of the Greek tragedies really is all of this. If you saw the movie Troy, that's totally wrong. The movie is totally wrong. But in any case, this is the ethical stage. He's trying to be ethical, but doesn't really believe in it. So the meaning of life for Agamemnon is totally devastating. So he moves on to the religious stage, living in faith. And his example here is Abraham. If you remember the story, Abraham and Sarai are out in the desert. They've left Ur because God said, leave the city. So he takes his flocks and his people and he goes to the desert. And the Elohim, the plural of God, the angels, whatever, arrive. There's 3. They show up and they have dinner. He feasts them. And they reward him by saying his heirs will inherit this whole land. Right? We talked about that, I think. And Sarai laughs at God because she's postmenopausal. So she thinks, that old fool believes them. And he did, actually. And so she offered him Hagar, her slave girl. He ends up having a child from Hagar, Ishmael, right? Call me Ishmael. No, it's a different story. But Ishmael, God hears him. El is God, right? Elohim, plural of God. El is God hears him. Rachel, Mike, El, they all mean something about God, right? Shield of God, whatever, right? In any case, he has a son, Ishmael. By the way, that causes conflict with Sarai, also known as Sarah, yes? But in any case, he takes Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert and leaves them there. Short story, he ends up, Ishmael kicks in the sand and you end up with Mecca, the well, right? Miracle, and Ishmael becomes the ancestor of the Arabs, right, in tradition, right? And meanwhile, Sarai actually does become pregnant and ends up having Isaac, right? Isaac or Israel? Why am I not remembering? his son Isaac, right? I don't even say which Sarah, Isaac. Did I say that? Right, Isaac. I don't know what Isaac means. Here it says laughter. So, laughter. In any case, the story goes, God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, up to the mountaintop and sacrifice him. And that's like, whoa. Some comedians come up with excellent examples of why Abraham might agree to this, Why do I have a bill for $400 for Nintendo? Take your son up and kill him. Okay. In any case, he takes his only son up to the mountaintop, according to the story, and the son says, Dad, you've got the knife, you've got the rope, and you've got the wood, but you forgot the animal. Of course, the animal is going to be the son. Ties him up, gets ready to kill him, and all of a sudden Gabriel stops him, and he sees he's got a ram stuck there in the brambles, and so he sacrifices the ram. Father and son come back down. Arabs argue that the only son must have been Ishmael, and so therefore the Arabs are the true inheritors of the land. And of course the Jewish community all argues it was really Isaac, because Ishmael, even though he was first, clearly the only at a certain point, but he wasn't legitimate, so it had to be Isaac. So you've got this traditional conflict between two groups of people, both of whom are Semitic. So I don't get what people are doing when they say they're anti-Semitic. They are Semitic. They can't be anti-Semitic, right? Well, I suppose you could. Could I be anti-Caucasian? I guess. As you might have guessed, both of my parents were Caucasian, as far as I know. Although they were Irish. At one time, the Irish were thought to be black. But then they took a bath. We're like, holy shoot, they're Caucasian. That was a true story, by the way. It actually happened. A British noble driving by in the rain or something, and he said, they're white. He hadn't seen them that way before. Well, Abraham shows belief, firm faith in God, so much so, really just the opposite of Agamemnon, who clearly sacrifices his daughter, really does, but clearly didn't want to. Abraham doesn't sacrifice his child, but clearly is willing to go do it. What makes the difference? Kierkegaard believes it's his faith. So Abraham, in fear and trembling, who demonstrates absolute faith by being willing to sacrifice Isaac. And it is only this stage that overcomes despair by finding meaning in God. Sorry to say, Kierkegaard died at age 42 in a state of despair. I suspect that he might be right about this, and he was wrong in thinking he could do it. He never actually achieved that kind of faith, or he would have not been in despair by his own description of how you get out of despair. He was also ill. He had fallen out of a tree when he was young, and so he had a limp, and his back was always sore. The day that he fell on the pavement and eventually died from not really recovering from that was the day that he took the last of his inheritance out of the bank. So he was now broke. adds to the depression. Even though he was a real hit as a writer, he wasn't making money from it. It was like he was writing opinion pieces in the paper, basically. So he's not getting